Flying taxis, the future of work, crypto's trust problem, and the ups and downs of being a lady engineer in the tech industry. It's a tall feat to make sense of it all, but I'm going to try with my guest today, Mellie Chow. Mellie is a product innovation executive, angel investor, and entrepreneur. She's a principal at Archangel Network of Funds and executive director of competitive intelligence and strategy at a Fortune 50 communication service provider. That's a mouthful. But first, welcome to this week's episode of Make Sense, a video podcast that simplifies complex issues at the intersection of tech and people. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Whether you're totally hyped on artificial intelligence, ready for the robot takeover, or you want to crawl into a cave after deleting all of your social media accounts, I'm here with my guests like Mellie to help make sense of what's going on so you can design yourself into the future. My name is Lindsay. I'm a product market fit strategist, innovation consultant, and venture fundraising advisor. So let's make sense of a lot of things today. We've got a lot to cover today, but first, Mellie Chow, how are you?
Great. I'm really happy to be here
So
today.
happy for you to be here too. We've been talking about this for quite a bit. Before we jump into the serious stuff, you shared with me that the Netflix show Beef is making you laugh these days. I haven't yet watched it, but what about this chaotic tale of road rage and such is so funny?
I find it super triggering in that it's like a culmination of all of life's frustrations and at the most interesting moments. Yeah, it's like a lot of laughs.
So also really relatable.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'll have to check it out. Let's start with our first segment, Crystal Ball. What does the future hold? This is where I call out interesting predictions for this year, and the experts, my guests, tell us their hot take. This time, or I've been doing for a while, I do kind of rapid fire. So, Mellie, I just want you to say, yes, I want that to happen, or no, please, no, or that's not going to happen anytime soon. And at the end, we will probably get into it deeper on some of these topics. So, here's the first one. Are you ready?
Ready.
Taxis will take to the skies for the wealthy. We will have drones big enough for humans that will act as air taxis. What do you
I would
think?
love for that to happen. I just feel like living in three dimensions is such a liberating space as opposed to in 2D and being tied to the Earth's surface. So I would love for that to happen. Hopefully, it solves some of our road congestion problems as well and just gives us more space to roam the Earth.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think it sounds pretty cool. I hope it's more accessible, not just to the super wealthy. What I found online is that transport authorities in France have started demonstrating their air taxi service that they want to debut during the Paris Olympic Games in 2024. So there will be flights from Charles de Gaulle Airport to a station on the Seine right in the middle of Paris, and they're slated to be about $119 for that one-way trip. Uh, I don't know about you, but in some countries I've been in, Iceland comes to mind. The ride from the airport to Reykjavik is about that much money in a taxi. So 119 makes me optimistic that like this will be available not just to the wealthy.
Yeah, it seems like it's going to become accessible over time, especially as it becomes more prevalent and available.
Yeah.
I think people in unmanned vehicles is kind of interesting, but also like for delivery services is also super interesting. A lot of companies experimenting with that. So hopefully it becomes more fact and less fiction over time, but also accessible to
Yeah.
your average consumer.
Yeah, I know that Amazon has been trying really hard for drone delivery for quite a long time, at least 5, 6 years in if I'm doing the math in my awareness of it, and they haven't quite cracked the code. So hopefully that will, you know, solve itself and work itself out soon. Okay, so we're going to change topics really quickly. Here's another headline. The school to work path will be turned on its head. So some companies are dropping degree requirements and the competition between colleges will heighten. You're at a Fortune 50 company. So what do you see as far as the school to work path and how your company looks at candidates?
Yeah, I think school to work paths are definitely getting disrupted. Like the entire sort of education, traditional certification, diplomas, like that's in question as to the relevancy, especially the pace of information and change. Like, how relevant is a degree applied to your job? And most would say, not that relevant, especially by the time I graduate and I've already spent, 4 to 5 years paying these absorbent fees. And now I have to spend the next few years of my life paying back my student debt, right? So I think it's definitely getting challenged. It's great that employers are opening up the requirements and more based on experience, skill sets, right? Track record, rather than diplomas and certifications, which are traditionally just a nod or a bar that has been previously defined, because these job definitions are changing so rapidly. And what it takes to be successful today isn't necessarily what it takes to be successful
Yeah,
yesterday.
100. All right, the next headline. Again, we are rapid fire, very different headlines and trends. So, despite crypto's trust crisis, leaders will push for widespread adoption by enhancing security, reliability, and user experience. Is widespread adoption of crypto on the next 1 year horizon, or is it farther than that?
Ooh, that's a tough question. Crypto's definitely not my sweet spot when it comes to research and just a focus area. And personally, I can say that, like, in sort of researching adoption of products and global scale, it's interesting that cash, time and time, comes up as the most widely adopted um, and used with the highest engagement of any type of product or experience. So I would say that, like, that time horizon is probably unlikely, because to disrupt that sort of old paradigm, one that's been around for centuries, probably is going to take a larger force to do that. I think if you take an analogy from my industry around, like, pay TV, for example, people have been talking about cord cutting forever, but we still have a pretty wide base of users. So it takes time for transition from analog to digital to happen. I think that will be very similar in the payments and financial space, where you can't exactly just turn on overnight like a new brand new currency that's going to
Yeah,
be widely adopted, when cash has always been king, and it's, like I said, the most widely used, adopted
product.
engagement product
Yeah.
out there.
I really like the way that you referred cash as a product, particularly because when I work with founders or I'm evaluating a startup and they come to me and I ask about competition and they say, no one else is like us, or we have no competition, I always call BS, because your competition is whatever anyone uses right now to solve their problem. So in our world, it's cash, debit cards, credit cards, and any kind of PayPal or peer-to-peer payment. Those are the existing, right? So crypto has to overcome that, right? And I know that some countries like Sweden don't use cash anymore, pretty much, right? There's some countries that tried experimenting with crypto as a form of their currency. But I think for crypto to really reach widespread adoption, the digital divide is standing in its way, right? There's a ton of people that don't have the technology, whether it's like laptops, desktops, and phones, to really use crypto as a like everyday currency.
Yeah, no, I love that you mentioned that because as a competitive intelligence analyst, I always say that your competition is definitely not just your direct or indirect competition, but you always need to look at do nothing. So and then DIY. And so the best products of our time change consumer behavior, right? You're training customers to behave differently or have a different mindset or outlook based on your products. So it takes a lot for that sort of momentum or incentive to happen. So yeah, I think change is definitely slow on the best days.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, I did my first virtual reality project in 2003, and it that's technology still fighting for widespread adoption, right?
Although Apple is releasing their MR headset later this year, and Oculus, so Meta, just announced their version 3
Okay.
recently too. So getting there. And I do believe that like this year will be the year of sort of MR and VR kind of coming to cross the chasm. But to your point, we've
Old.
been talking about it for decades.
Yeah. 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 All right. So the last headline: social media users will turn their back on the algorithm. So community building will happen more in private spaces over the big platforms, and we'll see the rise of smaller platforms. What do you think?
Yeah, I definitely can see that happening. Niche is the new mass market, right? Where you have specialized communities. I think Web3 and like the democratization or the decentralization of the internet will really help to pull that trend forward. DAOs is another example that just enables all of that. So um, decentralized autonomous organizations, right? So like think of it as community 3.0, but yeah, niche is going to be the new mass market.
Now, I have a question. Can you please, for our audience, just quickly define what a DAO is? Literally, what does the acronym stand for?
Decentralized autonomous organizations.
Okay.
And so I think of it as community 3.0, where, um, you know, it helps to organize groups of people that center around a common purpose to be able to basically direct and bring order in a self-directed way. So self-organized organizations.
Yeah. I think a future Makes Sense episode will have to be specific about DAOs. I know that I've kind of wrapped my head around them, but getting, like an expert to do a deep dive on these communities is definitely need some time to really tease that apart. So thank you, Mellie, for playing crystal ball with me. So many great insights. Let's move on to the next segment and take a deep dive. I want you to put your hat on as an angel investor yourself. That's one of the many roles you play. It's really a tough time for founders because of the economic uncertainty and instability we're in. What's your current investment thesis?
Yeah, so looking at trends and across product spaces and sort of forecasting out, like my personal thesis, I've really landed on something that resonated with me through the Alibaba story. and like Jack Welch's theory around smart businesses,
Okay.
where a smart business is essentially defined as any business that has gone digital, so has a digital presence that leverages machine learning, AI, and now even generative AI, that helps to operate their operations, and make decisions around their businesses so that they can respond more dynamically to changing demand, and market conditions. It allows you to pivot and adjust more quickly. Another way to describe it is, they're asset light, or and they don't necessarily carry inventory. Those are the things that I look for, when I think about my personal investment thesis. Is this new sort of emergent category around smart businesses?
Hmm.
And I think the pandemic was a great example of like watching a lot of businesses go from brick and mortar or physical to directly digital, and how quickly you can make that pivot. And the more asset light or inventory light you are, like the easier you were to kind of respond to that pandemic or that crisis, that moment. But as soon as, things kind of went back to
Right.
the new normal, people were your business dynamically adjusts pretty quickly as well.
Yeah, interesting. Let me tell you about a business I heard about last night, and you tell me if it's kind of smart. Um, this is kind of a done for you book publishing company. So they don't do any editing or feedback or anything. You give them something to print, they come up with they help you with the like cover art and stuff. And then they essentially and the legal, and then they get your stuff published on all the different platforms, Bookshop, Barnes and Noble, Amazon, any of the others. And then they print the books as the requests come in. So they have figured out a manufacturing model that allows them to print the books as the orders come in a light and lean way. Is that kind of a smart business because they're asset light?
Yeah, I would consider that like just in time manufacturing, or just in time ordering, or just in time like delivery of that asset or good to be a smart business. Like another great example is live stream shopping, right? Where a lot of influencers are selling goods, but they're selling it before they even make or manufacture a single product, right? They take pre-orders, and until they get to a certain volume level, then that's when they start to actually ship or commit to a shipment date or delivery date. That to me is a smart business. Another great example in my portfolio is a female founded company called Willful,
Mm-hmm.
and it's electronic wills, and it's in Canada, so serving that market. And I stumbled upon them during the pandemic, and it was such great timing because a number of regulations need to change before they could really scale and grow, and that was part of their fundraising. But like, I would consider that a smart business, because they took a old problem, which is documenting wills, that is a challenging, expensive process, right?
Right,
Into like a fully sort of digital process that
right,
is more affordable and like process lighter, and more accessible for your average consumer. And it helps and resonates with, the younger demographic as well, because that's how we want to consume, or we want to engage, right? We don't exactly want to spend an afternoon at the lawyer's office, right? Thinking
100%.
about these type of life milestones. But I think that type of engagement definitely resonates. Another example would be a company that have recently invested in, called Cyber Legends,
Okay.
and they are a ed tech company that essentially solves for digital safety and security, for kids. So like digital
Important.
etiquette, and helping us close that digital divide. But the product is really an RPG game.
Huh.
So games that they've created for grades 1 through 3 so far, and then the next raise is for content for grades 4 to 6, to help kids, become gain that sort of digital etiquette, right? Understand about, um, you know, digital safety, things like expectations, digital predator threats, like
Mhm.
things like that. Like, how do we want to behave? I think it's one thing to unlock access, like where everybody has a laptop and devices, but it's another thing to really learn how to use them. And so, like, that's the adoption and usage and engagement challenge that we have.
Yeah.
And I think that this company is solving a very important problem.
So, just to make sure that all the parents hear about this, what's the name? Cyber Legends?
Cyber Legends. Yep. And
Got it.
it's
Okay. And
available to download today. So,
cool, cool. And I love that you hit on live shopping because we talked about live shopping in a Make Sense episode with Elizabeth Kressel, who is a live shopping expert. I also love that you talk about pre-orders, kind of taking the model that what something like Kickstarter affords, like raising enough money to go into manufacturing. It's something I experimented with when my first business was an e-commerce business. How can we, for influencers, particularly in the fitness space back in 2013 and 14, they're like telling their followers to DM them or send them a PayPal amount to sell t-shirts, and it's really expensive to have all that merch and not be able to sell it. So I like that you also brought that up. And even with with kids, I talked about on an episode with Jinsey Jacob, a doctor, about what is digitally native actually doing to our children's brains. And I think that is an additionally super fascinating conversation. So if you are listening to this episode, it makes sense, make sure you check out those other episodes if you want to extend the conversation with ed tech or live shopping or the effects of technology on children. So let's get into our next segment. Mellie, you got into investing first as a founder, so that brings us to the segment, who needs a safety net? In this segment, I ask my guests to share their risks, their failures, nay, learning lessons of entrepreneurship and creating their own path into the future. Melly, you started as a founder, you had to fundraise as a woman. What is the story
well,
there?
I love this question because it's all about failing forward and definitely packed with lessons personally. But it basically started with my food tech startup. So the startup was called the Revolving Kitchen, and the category was cloud kitchens. Before the category even really
Mm-hmm.
existed, and so we pitched to a dragon from the Dragon's Den, so the Canadian version of Shark Tank, and essentially he hated our pitch. Like, he hated that we were an all female team. He didn't like the category. He didn't understand the business, and all of that just, like, it really really shook our confidence in every aspect, despite having
Right.
like really early traction, right? And there was a number of things we had to existentially ask ourselves about this business. And so the lessons were pretty clear, like, out of this food tech startup failure. One was, the industry category matters because high tides raise all boats, but you can't change how strong the tide is. So
Mm-hmm.
essentially, the industry that you choose, there are unit economics and like confines of that infrastructure and regulatory. So you can only go as fast as the roads are going to take you. So choose a industry category that you're really
100%.
passionate about. And the reason why I love my thesis around smart businesses is I'm not tied to any one category, right? Like traditional VCs are. The second big
You're
lesson
tied to an
was,
operational strategy.
that's right, an execution capability, essentially. The second lesson is that there's no such thing as a small business. And you kind of have to need to be all in, and raise early and often as much money as possible. And so there's no such thing as a small business because it takes just as much effort, energy, as you do, like running a, multi-billion dollar company versus, a couple $100,000 company. Like it is the same amount of effort
It
daily. I
does.
mean, we each only have 24 hours in a day, right? So I just find that,
I love that.
it's, yeah, there's no such thing as small business, and you have to be sort of all in, from the onset. And of course, that leads to raising as much money as possible. And the last lesson is, confidence matters. And for women, we often suffer from imposter syndrome. And we often pitch differently, right?
100%.
It just looks different when we show up.
100%.
And so 75% of women, according to KPMG, one of their reports in diversity, suffer from imposter syndrome. And so that's the majority of
Yeah.
us.
Right. But, to be fair, there are men that suffer from it too. I have men that I look to as mentors and advisors who will say to me, I love all the content you put out. That is so brave. I don't feel like I have any right to do that. Right. So, to be
Hmm.
fair, there are people that experience that. It does plague women a lot. And specifically when you get women into spaces where they are clearly the minority and the odds are against them, it's obviously going to bring out that imposter syndrome even more so.
Right. And I mean, capital flows to where it's welcomed, and it stays where it's well treated.
Yep.
And so I think
Yeah.
as a woman, we often are so uncomfortable like pitching because it's an ask, right? But also,
Hmm.
we're uncomfortable because we don't necessarily, because of that imposter syndrome, right? Like kind of fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
And then that uncertainty or confidence level of like, okay, now that I have the
Right.
funding, how am I going to make sure that I'm fiscally responsible and I bring the outsized returns that investors, expect? So there's a lot of pressures,
Yeah.
and I think, in terms of risk, it's just more challenging for women.
Sure. So that brings us to our final segment. You started to get into it. From disruptive to disastrous, the good, the bad, the ugly. We talk about when technology or forward momentum that seems to be disruptive in a good way backfires. I'm obsessed personally with the fact that despite all the growth and innovation we've had in the past 20 years, it really hasn't resulted in economic productivity indicators going up. So obviously there's a lot that's going from disruptive to disastrous, but we don't quite understand it yet. So, we talked a little bit about women engineers. We both share an engineering background, and the feelings of failure and how it affects women. So, I guess, how has your desire, your personal experience informed how you want to support other female founders, other women who face inequities in their industry and their roles?
Yeah, so to basically accelerate my impact, and the change that I wanted to see, I flipped the script from being a founder to a funder. And so got on the funding side to help change the complexion of women in venture and angel investments. And
Love it.
I'm part of the Archangel Axiom Fund. And we're different because, just our makeup of the group of GPs and LPs. I think we are just diverse in nature, right? In terms of like what we look like and also our skill sets are super complementary, and our due diligence process has like, been very equitable and fair in that respect. But also, we've doubled down on an additional sub fund called Phoenix Fire, which is,
Cool.
and Archangel has four sub funds. Axion is one of them, and then Phoenix
Got
Fire
it.
is another. And it focuses on investing in female founders, right? And providing more equity, because it's not just about equality, right? I think equality gets you part of the way, and the difference between equality and equity is that equity really talks about the gap or the delta between where you're starting from. So it matters where you're starting from,
Hmm.
and it helps to bridge that gap so
Right.
that everybody finishes more fairly, or can arrive at that point more
Sure.
fairly. And so Phoenix Fire addresses that funding gap when it comes to women founders, right? Because like female funded companies, I think get like somewhere like 5% or to 20% of all venture
Or
funding,
less.
right?
Yeah.
Yep, in Canada and the US. So it helps like with a fund that's focused on that type of thesis. Hopefully, it
Hmm.
helps not only with the confidence and recognizing that women pitch differently, but also gives them more opportunity, um, and to collaborate with like-minded GPs and LPs that really care about the impact.
Hmm.
Um,
For anyone that doesn't know much, let me interrupt you real quick. So, for anyone that doesn't know, we want to make sense. GPs and LPs, general partners, limited partners. Limited partners are the ones that uh, fund the venture, and general partners are the ones that run the venture fund, right? So, limited partners fund the venture fund, general partners administer, do the deal flow, due diligence, make the decisions about investing. So, if you hear GPs, LPs, that's what Mellie is talking about. Now you know for the future episodes of Make Sense if that term comes up. So, Mellie, I do have one question before we wrap up. You said that the Phoenix Fire, did I get that right?
mhm, that's right.
Yeah. Okay. You're increasing the equity, but when we talk about equality and equity in the venture space, equity also means money. So did you not just equity or parity across different types of people and subgroups? So when you said increase the equity, are you writing bigger checks or leading rounds for female founders? Because that is a way to get other investors to come on board.
Yeah, so it is definitely in the literal sense. They are
Hmm.
leading rounds for female funded companies and writing larger checks. And having said that, it's also in the figurative term as well. But also, it's helping women
Okay.
ensure that they maintain the equity in the business as a female founder as well. And that there is
Hmm.
fair play around that, and they don't get diluted or more diluted than
Yeah, they're
their
not
male
trying to take
counterparts.
advantage.
That's right.
Yeah,
And
they're not
helping
trying to
the
take
female
advantage of the founder.
founders makes sense of all of that.
Right, right, right. Oh my God, I've loved this conversation so much. We've hit on so many great topics. If we're gonna make sense of anything, I think one thing that you said that is really important is that when we talk about these trends, whether it's air taxis or crypto, mass market adoption takes a long, long time, right? It takes a really long time, and we some of these things don't turn over overnight, despite media wanting to tell you uh, that it's going to happen, and also, like, let's just, make sense of this space. There are women like Mellie and me that are fighting for the space in these industries and in these decision making rooms to influence the equity and equality of other non-majority groups, if I can be polite about saying that. So thank you for listening to Make Sense with me, your host, Lindsay Tavis, and guest, Mellie Chow. We hope you enjoyed our take on lots of topics. Mellie, also thank you for educating us on the term smart businesses. Where could people find you online? LinkedIn? Are you open to people reaching out on LinkedIn if they have any follow-up questions?
Yeah, LinkedIn is probably the best way to find me. And it's just Mellie Chow on LinkedIn.
That's awesome. You are a busy, busy woman, so I really appreciate you taking the time today to talk to all of us. To our listeners, if you want to continue to be the smartest person in the room, and I know you do, hit that subscribe button for next week's episodes. Follow wherever you get your podcasts. We are so happy to have you. Thank you, Mellie, for joining us.
Thank you.